bring something to eat, right? Let's say an apple or banana or sandwich or something like that. Keep it in your pocket and then go on the hike like normal, touching trees and rocks and climbing on things and all that. You're touching things, you're in the environment, and then pull out that food and eat it without trying to clean your hands off and all that, right? That mimics most closely how our ancestors consumed and got exposed to microbes.
Let's ditch the quick fix and dive into today's conversation. We know that, these comorbidities, these things that, have an impact on the immune system are consistent with the other, conditions that people suffer from: diabetes, cancer, heart disease, cardiovascular disease, all the different things. And so, in a kind of a nutshell, I know antibiotics are pretty hard on the gut lining. What are some of the other things, lifestyle things? Because, it's kind of like, as we look in the rearview mirror, what did we learn? And then how do we apply that as we go forward to better lifestyle? So what are some of the really kind of the big hits that people fall into the trap when it comes to lifestyles that have such a negative impact that make them more vulnerable to viruses, cancers, heart disease, all those things?
Yeah, one of the key things, and I think, unfortunately, having gone through the pandemic, most of us, this has actually gotten worse. One of the key things is stress. So stress, there was a 2015 publication in the Frontiers of Immunology, and that was a meta-analysis paper, which means that it's a publication that was published by reviewing all of the studies on this that are in scope of the topic, right? And the whole point of it is to review all of the data and information that's out there that's already been published on the topic and come to kind of a scientific consensus, right? And they basically concluded that stress-induced intestinal permeability, and then the leaking in of toxins, endotoxins in particular, as a result of that, and then the chronic low-grade inflammation that leads to, was the number one cause of mortality and morbidity worldwide, right? Stress-induced intestinal permeability. So that in itself is huge when you think about it, right?
It is.
The number one killer on earth today is stress-induced leaky gut. People talk about, why stress is bad for you and all that, and it's about stress management, this and that. But we now know at the molecular level how it causes disease, right? It's easy for people to understand that smoking is bad for you. There's a toxin that's coming in and hurting your lungs.
Right.
It's easy for people to understand other things that you might choose to put in and on your system that are bad for you. But stress is kind of esoteric in a way. But when you look at it at the cellular molecular level, it is the most toxigenic thing that occurs to our system, right? And here's an interesting thing. I've been doing a lot of lectures on gut-brain axis in conferences and all that. One of the things that the research is pretty clear about, if you start to connect the dots, is what we experience most of our life as stress, anxiousness, maybe even as far as depression, right, mood disorders, and so on.
Sure.
All of those are actually early Alzheimer's, early Parkinson's, right? Because Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, two of the scariest neurodegenerative aging-related diseases,
Absolutely.
have the same exact pathology as poor stress response.
Okay.
Right? So what drives poor stress response also drives Alzheimer's risk. And that's also tied to the microbiome. So stress is one of those things we really have to keep in mind as a big, big driver of dysfunction in our system. And if we have time, we can talk about how the microbiome plays a role in that. Another thing to point out that is a big, egregious driver of dysfunction are the pesticides and herbicides that we have abundantly around us, right?
Yeah, environmental exposures.
Yeah, exactly. Like glyphosate, for example. And
Right.
these act as antibiotics. And not only you take glyphosate, what's even more surprising about it, not only is it an antibiotic and you're finding it in your food and water and all that, it's probably one of the worst kinds of antibiotics because it specifically kills beneficial bacteria. And it allows for opportunistic bacteria who tend to be resistant to it to proliferate. So exposure over time not only just kills everything like many prescription antibiotics do,
Right.
in this case, it's slowly decimating the good bacteria by allowing the dysfunctional bacteria to propagate, right? So that is such a big issue in our population. And I think if people start making choices with their wallets a little bit better,
Right.
we'll start to see that issue go away over time, right? So there's lots of other ones, but I would say those three things: the overuse of antibiotics, the ubiquity of pesticides, herbicides, and then stress. Yeah, those three.
Huge. Yeah, and I think we could circle into that, how the gut-brain, connection, you want to develop that a little bit further by maybe kind of jumping into some of the products that are out there. And I know you've been a key part of developing some of the probiotics and, maybe some lifestyle changes, and how that does connect, what's going on in the gut with Parkinson's, dementia, Alzheimer's, and all those types of things that are associated. So maybe let's switch into a little bit of that kind of conversation.
Yeah, a little gut-brain axis. So, and we've been working a lot. We've been working for 7-8 years on the gut-brain axis, to developing what we term, and a lot of people use the same term, psychobiotics. Right? Psychobiotics are probiotic bacteria that of course you ingest, so they go in your gut, but they have an effect on the brain and brain type of response. But basically, to simplify it for people, what happens when you experience stress, right? And why stress can be so egregious. When you experience an external stressor, and it could be something as small as somebody cutting you off on the way to work, or a comment from somebody in the morning, what tends to happen is the external stressor gets perceived by a part of your brain called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus then releases a hormone to activate the pituitary gland. Then the pituitary gland releases a hormone to activate the adrenals. And then the adrenals release a hormone we all are familiar with called cortisol, right? So all that happens in milliseconds, right? So you've got a stressor coming in, then the result is cortisol starts to get released. Now, cortisol is important because it helps facilitate the body towards this flight or fight response, right? Because the whole purpose of stress is a survival mechanism, right? We have that mechanism in us for survival, because through most of the course of human evolution, our perception of stress was validated by that if you didn't respond to the stress appropriately, you probably will get eaten or killed in some way, right? And so our flight or fight response that we developed in us is a really important part of survival. The big problem with today is twofold. Number one, most of the things that stresses aren't really life or death anymore, right? It's a comment on a thread in Facebook, and we're arguing away with people online and so on, and we're causing stress to ourselves. At the same time, the other side of the problem is that we experience stress, but we can't come down from it, right? We stay at this heightened, anxious state for a long period of time. And then it becomes clinical, where you have something called generalized anxiety disorder, which means you're always in the flight or fight response.
Always in that sympathetic mode and not enough of the parasympathetic.
That's exactly right, right? And for people's simplicity of understanding, the parasympathetic is called the rest and digest phase, right? So if you're always in sympathetic and you're in the flight or fight response, you can't rest, you can't digest, you can't rebuild, you can't repair any of that stuff. It doesn't happen, right? Or at least it doesn't happen effectively. So you're negating a very important part of your functionality. So going back to the perception of stressors, right? So when you experience a stressor, your HPA axis, your hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, gets activated. The adrenals are now starting to pump out cortisol. On the same time, through the brainstem, you get an activation of the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is doing a few things to get you ready to fight or flee from that area. It's trying to concentrate blood to areas like your brain. So your brain is very acute, and your vision is acute, your hearing is acute. It's trying to concentrate blood to your heart, to get your heart pumping, to be able to feed your muscles, all of that. And then it's also removing functionality from things like your digestive tract and all that, because you don't need blood and resources rushing to that area, because you're supposed to be trying to survive, right? It's also increasing the respiratory rate, causing vasodilation and all of that, so you're ready to fight or flee. It's doing all of that through activating the immune system. We talked about those dendritic cells early. Those are the ones that present antigens to the immune system. the sympathetic nervous system activates dendritic cells and microglia cells, or macrophages and microglia cells in the brain to increase perfusion. How do they get blood into these areas? They get blood into these areas by increasing inflammation in the areas, right? So the sympathetic nervous system releases a set of compounds called catecholamines. The catecholamines activate and irritate the innate immune system, and the innate immune system then increases the inflammatory responses to bring blood to the area. So what's happening when you're in this flight or fight state is you have removed resources from non-essential functions at the moment, which includes digestion, repair, your immune system, and so on. You're concentrating energy and resources to your brain and to your heart and to your muscles to be able to run and fight or whatever you need to do. And all of that is being done through inflammation. So now you've got inflamed brain, inflamed central nervous system, inflamed heart, and you can't repair, digest, or do any of those other things, right? You're in this state. Now, that state's important for survival, but you need to be able to come down from it, right? So the way you come down from it is cortisol, as it's building up in the system as you're experiencing stressor, also gets dumped into the GI tract. The reason why cortisol gets dumped into the GI tract is there's a number of microbes in the gut that break down cortisol in the GI tract, and then break down some of the cortisol, not all of it, but they break down some. And the byproducts of that breakdown actually are sent to the kidneys, where we change the amount of sodium that's being pumped into the blood. And the reason we change the amount of sodium being pumped in the blood is because we want to increase blood pressure, right? So that the body can get perfused. So that's one critical role of cortisol. That's also why if you experience chronic stress, your blood pressure naturally goes up, right? It's all related to it. Now, the other thing that happens when cortisol gets dumped into the gut, if your gut is unhealthy, is cortisol causes your gut to become leaky, right? In an unhealthy gut that's missing a couple key components, your gut becomes leaky. Now, what happens when your gut becomes leaky is inflammation goes up. In particular, one biomarker called interleukin-6, right? So interleukin-6 starts to climb. Now, what interleukin-6 does screws up the entire system. Interleukin-6 makes its way to the brain and re-triggers the HPA axis, thereby releasing even more cortisol again, right? Now, this is a re-triggering of the HPA axis after you're done with that stressor, right? Whatever that little stressor is. So now a single stressor that you experience in the morning can continue to re-trigger your HPA axis over and over again, because cortisol is making your gut leaky, it's increasing more inflammation, and in particular, it's increasing IL-6.
Just keeps that loop going.
Keeps that loop going, right? Now, here's another double whammy for us on this process, right? One of the ways in which you come down from all of this system is as cortisol levels start to build, and especially as it's dumping into the gut, it starts binding things called glucocorticoid receptors. The binding of these glucocorticoid receptors starts to send signals to your nervous system to tone down the sympathetic nervous system and bring this parasympathetic back up, right? That's the shutoff switch for this whole fight or flight response. The big problem when cortisol makes your gut leaky and that IL-6 goes up, not only is it re-stimulating your HPA axis, but it's actually down-regulating the expression of those glucocorticoid receptors.
So you don't get the shutoff.
You don't get the shutoff signal, right? So the turnoff switch is not present. You can't find it. It doesn't exist. So not only is a single stressor going to continuously reactivate your flight or fight response, the turnoff switch is not present. So we stay in this constant state of flight or fight, which compromises our immune system, which creates inflammation throughout the body, which also negates repairing damaged tissue, right? So you think about the brain, for example. The brain goes through all kinds of damage throughout the day, from just the oxidative stress, the inflammation, all of that stuff that's happening in the brain. At night, when you rest, a compound goes up called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. BDNF induces repair to the brain while you're sleeping, so that you can wake up the next day and be in the same state that you were in the beginning of the previous day, right? But when IL-6 is up and the HPA axis is continuously activated, not only are you not sleeping, right? Because remember, you can't fall asleep when you're stressed,
You
and
ramp
the
up.
and the parasympathetic is down, right? You're also not expressing BDNF, which means you can't repair all the damage that's occurred throughout the day. So now you're in this net state of constantly being inflamed, of constantly driving damage, constantly being stressed, without the ability to repair your own tissue, without the ability to properly digest and assimilate nutrients, and without the ability to properly rest, right? So being in that state for years on end
Right.
becomes the most damaging thing to the body. Now, there are microbes in the gut that negate that whole process, right? The moment cortisol dumps into the gut, if you have the right types of microbes, they totally stop the leaky gut response of cortisol and stop that inflammation, stop that IL-6 from reactivating the HPA axis, and stop IL-6 from negating glucocorticoid receptors. One of the ones we started working with is a keystone species called Bifidolongum, and it's the strain number 1714 because it's got this peptidoglycan layer on it. The bacterial peptidoglycans that the bacteria is making are the key compound to actually stopping the negative effects of cortisol when it enters into the gut, allowing you to feel stress, go through the flight or fight response, but then appropriately come down from it like you should be able to, right? So that in itself, again, is a role of the microbiome to control the whole stress response signaling, which then impacts everything else in your body, including the immune system, your metabolic system, and so on.
Very, very in depth there, and so many follow-ups that we don't have enough time to consider. But one of the thoughts I have is I recently listened to a TED Talk, and it was talking about, the person was talking about, and I'd like to remember her name, but the stress impact. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, in the cardiovascular studies, they found that basically, and I'm going to paraphrase and summarize due to time, but most people that have problems cardiovascularly, for example, as a result of stress, is because they are afraid that the stress has something negative to impact them.
Right. Yeah.
But those that were not afraid, it's like hardly any negative cardiovascular impact. So it's really, you can't control a lot of the stressors that are going to come your way, but you can try to control how you react to them. So that's an important component of what we're talking about here. How do you identify and react? And one of the applications that this was considered was cold plunge or ice baths. You can be afraid of that ice bath, and it can cause you more problems and compared to if you're not afraid of it. And you have to learn how to develop that proper fear. Like you're saying, this is not a dinosaur. It's not a lion that's coming to get you. You're not going to die with this. So don't overactivate your system and then get into this continual loop system going on that you're talking about. So I think that's an important concept. But then the other concept that we're kind of needing to hit on here too is if we can control some of our psychological response to stressors and other environmental exposures and all of the above, now how do we fix and you mentioned, I think, one strain that you work with, and it has an encapsulation that makes it into that area. I think that's an important part of the conversation too. It makes it past the gastric, and is more viable once it gets into where we're having the leaky gut process. So yeah, if you could get a little bit deeper there, and I know we're kind of running on time here. So
yeah, we can give people a few quick tips. Obviously, because we need to empower people, right, with action that they can take. Right. So some simple things. So yes, the strain I'm talking about is a Bifidobacterium 1714. It's got that peptidoglycan layer on it, which allows it to survive better, and it's that key peptidoglycan that also negates all of this stress response, this overactive stress response as well. So using psychobiotics like that can help, and then of course working on mindfulness work and reframing and cognitive behavior therapy, all of those things should be added together to do it, right? There's never a magic pill for any of this stuff. So I would encourage people to find ways of de-stressing and being able to disengage from the day to day that drives them, crazy, if you will, and find ways of relaxing and restabilizing and grounding yourself. You can use psychobiotics that'll give you a leg up and give you an upper hand as well. The other things, we work a lot with the spore-based probiotics with leaky gut. So that's another good option from a probiotic perspective that helps with the leaky gut concept. But the other things that are simple that you can do are like intermittent fasting, right? Intermittent fasting has been shown to be able to improve the microbiome and improve diversity, even though that seems kind of counterintuitive. For me, I do the simple, 14 or 16-hour fast, mostly through the night. And I after dinner, my next meal of the day is somewhere around 11 or 12 o'clock. So I give myself some fasting period through the night. And that can have a measurable impact on your microbiome. I think we talked about earlier the whole issue of Roundup, glyphosate, and herbicides and pesticides. If you just start to, try to gain access to organic and cleaner foods that aren't laden with these things, that'll make a huge impact on the health of your microbiome. Being able to just reduce the exposure to things that harm the microbes in itself will be profoundly impactful. At the same time, gaining more exposure to microbes is also very beneficial. You're lucky you're in the Northwest. There's lots of beautiful outdoor areas near you. We have a lot of forest preserves and all that where there's hikes and all through the woods. People need to be prescriptive about getting back out in nature, right? So we talked about symbiogenesis earlier, right? That's how we evolve. We exist because of symbiogenesis. We exist because we are designed to be in constant osmosis with the natural environment. We are exchanging microbes with the outside environment constantly. And one of the biggest detriments to our health and wellness is that we now live in these relatively sterile concrete bubbles, right? And so being able to go outdoors 2-3 times a week, spending 30-40 minutes outside in a natural environment will have a profound impact on your microbiome.
And don't hesitate to get dirty sometimes when you're out there climbing in the forest and doing things.
Well, one of the things I encourage people to do that, and they always get a little confused as they're like, well, how should I go on a hike and roll around in the dirt? And I'm like, well, I mean, yes, if you can, you can do that. But a simple thing would be bring something to eat, right? Let's say an apple or banana or sandwich or something like that. Keep it in your pocket and then go on the hike like normal, touching trees and rocks and climbing on things and all that. You're touching things, you're in the environment. And then pull out that food and eat it without trying to clean your hands off and all that, right? That's how that mimics most closely how our ancestors consumed and got exposed to microbes, right? That gives you a certain degree of exposure. So
again, positive microbes.
Right?
We're not wrestling around in the pig pen on the farm. We're out in nature, yeah.
Yeah, and or in the public restroom, right? I'm not saying go to the public toilet and then don't wash your hands. By all means, wash your hands there. But yes, in natural, untouched environments, you want those microbes. You want that exposure, and it makes a big difference. And there's studies on that as well. And then with your diet, if you can diversify your diet, that's always going to be beneficial as well, right? Trying to add in new foods into your system because they feed different types of bacteria within your system. Right. And people work on, there's all kinds of sensitivities and all that people have to work through, but try to, as much as you can, increase the diversity in your diet. And just those few simple tools themselves will have a huge impact on the microbiome. Another one that people should really think about, which I practice in my home all the time, is about not sterilizing your home. Right. That's an unfortunate programming that we all have, that clean in the home means everything's sterilized and all the surfaces have that spick and span, lemon fresh smell, right? Most surfaces in your home, 90% of surfaces do not need to be sterilized, right? We clean most of our surfaces with just a cloth and some water, and we might put 1 or 2 drops of essential oil for a little smell, but that's about it, right? We don't bleach and disinfect every surface because you need to build a microbial environment in your home. And lots of studies show the more you sterilize your home, the more risk you have for allergies, asthma, virus infections, and all that. So That's just another simple tip that people can do. And keep in mind with the microbiome, when you add all these things together, they become quite profound, right? So any one of them by themselves will be a bit of a help. But if you can start to round it out and do all of these things to a certain degree, you're going to see a profound change in your microbiome, then your immune system, and then your stress response and everything else that goes along with it.
That's very good. And specifically, I wanted to just say or ask the question, with your particular products, the different probiotic, prebiotic, what's kind of the usual application in general, or possibly somebody just that wants to have wellness, somebody that's a little bit concerned about a leaky gut or knows they have a leaky gut or has an autoimmune?
Our most general foundational probiotic is the Spore-biotic. That's a spore-based probiotic. It's the first multi-spore-based probiotic ever designed and launched. And we have now, I think, about 11 studies published on it. And we have a variety of studies on many different outcomes, right? Because what we're trying to demonstrate is that if you deal with some of the foundational issues within the gut microbiome, you actually will see the response in many different ways, whether it's acne or triglycerides or, joint pain. We have studies on all these different areas using the same exact formula. And the reason for that is because it's foundationally improving how your body functions by addressing the leakiness in the gut and addressing the diversity of the microbiome. So when you're looking at a foundational probiotic to just kind of protect your system, deal with the leaky gut, give you overall wellness, the Megaspore is critical. For the mood balance issues and the sleep issues, we have a line called ZenBiome. We have a ZenBiome Cope for day-to-day stress and anxious feelings, and then ZenBiome Sleep for those that don't sleep really well. And if you have a real dysfunctional gut, you've had lots of course of antibiotics, you have all kinds of GI issues, you get bloating, cramping, all kinds of things, then you want to consider what we call the total gut restoration system. That's the Megaspore, a specific type of prebiotic, and then a product called Mega Mucosa, which rebuilds that mucosal lining that we talked about a lot. That's a 90-day, thing that you do, so 3 months. And at the end of the 3 months, the whole idea is that you've really gone in and revamped not only your microbiome, but your gut lining and the immunological response and all that within the gut. So even if people just think about those three things, just the Megaspore is your daily, I want to feel good, protect myself kind of my probiotic. If you have more profound problems, then think about the TGR, the total gut restoration, and commit to that for 90 days. And if you're dealing with stress, mood, and sleep issues, then the ZenBiome fits right into that.
Very cool. So how would one follow up with you on all of this information and some of the products?
Yeah, absolutely. So visit us at microbiomelabs.com. That's our homepage, where you'll find lots of resources there to understand not only the microbiome and science, but also the products. Feel free to reach out to me as well on social. I try to engage with people as much as I can. On Instagram, my handle is Kiran Biome. So KiranBiome. And, I get people on there all the time asking me questions and whatnot. And I try to engage with them to provide them some resources. I'm also on Facebook under Kiran Krishnan, so you can look that up and find me there. So yeah, please feel free to reach out, and I do my best to try to help direct people to the right resources.
Oh, very, very good. I so much good information. So thankful that you're sharing, the detail that you've shared. I know you've got one of those brains. I go back to the start. I enjoyed the mathematical parts of some of my doctorate studies. I didn't enjoy the physics as much.
Right.
So I'm glad to be in the biological kind of frame, but that physics part really kind of contributes to it as well. But what a great wealth of information, and what a good family history that has blessed your ability to bless us today. So thank you for joining us, Kiran.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, and really appreciate the opportunity to get to talk about all this to people, to empower people, right? To really do well for themselves and their families. So thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And everyone, we'll wrap it up there. Everybody have a great day. Thank you.